Whether you're a highly refined athlete or a sloppy Joe, everyone will experience a cramp at some point in their lives, whether that be after laborious exercise or at night. Cramps occur when muscles, usually in the legs, suddenly and involuntarily contract, causing pain and temporary immobility of that muscle. It is classified as a cramp if it is a spasm or involuntary contraction that is forceful and sustained. They can go away in a matter of seconds, minutes, or hours, and usually resolve themselves without the need for intervention. Given that cramps specifically occur in the muscles, it makes sense to look at the mechanism behind muscle contraction. There are two types of muscles, the first of which is striated muscle tissue. This type of muscle contains repeating functional units called sarcomeres, arranged in regular and parallel bundles, resulting in a streaked appearance. These sarcomeres contain the two primary protein filaments actin or thin and myosin or thick, which help to achieve striated muscles' primary function, contracting and generating force. How it does this is explained in a model first proposed in 1954 and has also since remained impressively intact. This model is called the sliding filament theory and relies upon the interaction between the previously mentioned thin actin and thick myosin filaments. Firstly, there is a centralized A band of myosin, which remains constant in length during contraction. The I band consists of thin actin filaments that slide past myosin, thus generating muscle tension. Since actin filaments are tethered together at the lateral ends of each sarcomere, called Z bands, as the I band shortens, so too does the sarcomere and hence the muscle. A useful analogy for this model is thinking about a person made of myosin pulling two bookcases or Z bands towards them using two actin ropes. One later addition to the theory explained how myosin pulls actin towards it and shortens the sarcomere. At the globular end of the myosin molecule, nearest to actin, there is an S1 region containing multiple hinge segments, which bends and allows myosin to walk along actin. Myosin reaches forward to grab actin by forming cross bridges, subsequently contracts and bends to move it along, and then releases it and binds to another. The contraction or power stroke of the S1 head region requires the hydrolysis of ATP, which allows the cycling to take place. Without it, myosin binds to actin indefinitely, thus explaining the stiffness seen in rigor mortis. Many mechanisms regulate this contraction to ensure that the muscle doesn't contract either too frequently or insufficiently. The two significant components this involves are ATP and calcium. ATP can be described as the power, whereas calcium is the trigger. ATP supplies energy to the sarcomeres, and calcium is needed for the two proteins troponin and tropomyosin. These two proteins regulate muscle contraction by binding to the S1 region, preventing actin from doing the same during contraction. This action is slightly more complicated. For myosin-actin binding to occur, tropomyosin must rotate around the thin actin filaments to expose the myosin binding sites. Troponin is what shifts the tropomyosin protein, having bound to calcium so that cross-bridge cycling can occur. Once the myosin binding sites are exposed, assuming enough ATP is present, myosin binds to actin to begin cross-bridge cycling again, causing the muscle sarcomeres to contract. Therefore, calcium is what allows muscle contraction to occur, as it enables these inhibitor proteins to move away from the myosin binding sites. There are two further types of striated muscle, namely cardiac and skeletal muscle. Cardiac muscle is the involuntary muscle of the heart, responsible for contracting and pumping blood around the body. It also contains bundles, though unlike skeletal muscle, they are arranged and connected at branching irregular angles called intercalated discs. Skeletal muscle, on the other hand, is a voluntary muscle that is anchored to bone by tendons and controls breathing, movement, and posture. Apart from striated muscle, the second muscle group is smooth muscle. All smooth muscle is involuntary and found within hollow organs and other structures such as the esophagus, stomach, intestines, bronchi, uterus, urethra, bladder, blood vessels, and erector pili muscles in the skin. Its principal function is to apply pressure to vessels, though it is far more energy efficient than skeletal muscle. In terms of its structure, smooth muscle is a collection of short, tapered cells containing a single central nucleus. The actin and myosin filaments lie in between each other in branching bundles, which do not contract in one direction like a striated muscle. While skeletal muscles use calcium from internal stores to activate troponin to unblock binding sites, smooth muscle uses calcium in a slightly different way. Its calcium is from the extracellular fluid and is used to activate the messenger protein calmodulin, which allows myosin light chain kinase to phosphorylate the head of myosin, allowing it to perform cross-bridge cycling. You can get cramps in either skeletal or smooth muscle, though the latter is more uncommon. So, what exactly are the causes and risk factors for cramps? During cramps, muscles cannot relax efficiently, as the myosin proteins do not fully detach from the actin filaments. So, we look to the two factors discussed earlier, ATP and calcium, as the culprits. For skeletal muscle, muscle fatigue is the most frequent cause of the muscle cramping up. When the muscle is overworked in this way, the central nervous system mechanisms designed to inhibit muscle contraction are depressed. This is because there isn't enough ATP being supplied to allow the myosin heads to detach and allow the muscle to relax. Similarly, as skeletal muscles work in antagonistic pairs, one muscle has to relax for the other to contract, and vice versa. Hence, there has to be enough ATP for the processes in both muscles to occur. Dehydration and electrolyte imbalances may also cause muscle cramps to arise more quickly, though they are not the sole cause. In a 2005 study which compared athletes with and without adequate hydration and electrolytes, 69% of the subjects still experienced exercise-associated muscle cramps, or EAMCs, when they were hydrated and supplemented with electrolytes. Diuretics may also deplete levels of minerals such as sodium, potassium and calcium, thus increasing the likelihood of cramping. Another thing which may induce muscle spasms is injury, as the muscle may spasm as a protective mechanism to help minimize movement and stabilize the area. Nocturnal cramps are less well understood and could potentially be a result of sitting or sleeping in an awkward position, or an alternative underlying health condition. Smooth muscle can also cramp, but given that these muscles are involuntary, it isn't usually from any kind of human input. The most common areas of smooth muscle which cramp are in the uterus and gastrointestinal system. Menstrual cramps occur as the uterus contracts to help expel its lining, which is triggered by prostaglandins, a group of lipids which are involved in pain, inflammation, and infection control. Stomach and intestinal cramps may occur as a result of gastroenteritis, in which these areas become inflamed, triggering symptoms such as vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain. There are also a few underlying health conditions associated with muscle cramping, such as inadequate blood supply, nerve compression, or the shifting of bodily fluids that occur during diseases like cirrhosis and kidney failure. The treatment for cramps is relatively straightforward and includes regular stretching and massaging and applying heat or cold to the affected area. Both of these things help to relax the muscles and relieve excessive contraction. Cramps usually go away after a few minutes to a quarter of an hour on their own. Therefore, pain medications such as ibuprofen and paracetamol will not help as these take longer to take effect. However, you should see a GP if they last longer than 15 minutes, as this may be a sign of tetanus poisoning. As painful as they can be, the bottom line is that cramps shouldn't be a cause for concern.